Hello, I'm Dr. John Cruz, and today I'm going to be talking about tips for dealing with perfectionism, mostly in the setting of ADHD, but this is applicable to other areas of dealing with perfectionism. So some of this is overlapping with the presentation. It's episode number 41 if you're on YouTube that I did on March 26th, so just 4 months ago. But this talk today, the intent is to be much more hands-on practical tips rather than just information about perfectionism. So to summarize from that though, that the perfectionism is often defined as compulsively straining for an unattainable, flawless goal. So by definition, it's unattainable, that the state of perfection isn't possible, and it's clearly a barrier to productivity, even though it seems like it's almost the opposite of ADHD, where people are distracted and wandering all over the place and can't buckle down. Almost a third of people with ADHD, have some amount of OCD traits, and perfectionism is strongly associated. Certainly everyone with ADHD doesn't have it, but there's a strong connection. And the most important part of my summary is that perfectionism, even though some people phrase it or frame it as a part of your temperament or part of your makeup that's unchangeable, there are good studies showing that CBT and other approaches, acceptance and commitment, a few others, can measurably have an impact and help you be less perfectionistic. So launching right into it, I'll talk about first 3 general areas. So one is self-talk, so what you're saying to yourself that may help you get out of this perfectionism. 2, how to adjust your goals rather than going with your perfectionistic goals. And 3 is using others, being accountable to others, using social systems, using people outside of yourself to help with the perfectionism. And then I'm going to be talking a little bit about the initiation of tasks and the completion, because those, yes, people can get stuck in the middle, but it's far and away starting the task, ending the task that people get most stuck up with their perfectionism. So jumping back to the self-talk first. One of the things there is praising yourself for what you are doing right. So again, almost always perfectionism, we're focusing on the little tiny, I'm not getting this quite right, this isn't lined up, this piece of code isn't doing this one particular thing I needed to do, and we lose track of the bigger picture of what we've already accomplished, of what big chunks are already done, what the program in general is running and doing, what the painting looks like overall, rather than whether the shade of brown in this corner where the trees are is right or not. And if you're thinking about praising your accomplishments, that actually forces you to look for them. So again, part of that micro focus, that hyper focus, that attention to the details that are not getting right, that are sticking, that are not perfect yet, pulls you away from the bigger picture, and reminding yourself to praise yourself forces you to look at that bigger picture. So a second piece of the self-talk help for dealing with perfectionism is relabeling the perfectionism itself, or starting out by labeling. So calling this behavior that you're doing as perfectionism, and being clear that you're referring, I know there are people who say, I'm a perfectionist, and again, I'm not saying being attentive to detail, being thorough, trying to do a very good job, those are all good and useful traits, but again, when they're carried to the extreme, they can get in the way, and it's much healthier if you are defining perfectionism as a behavior rather than as a part of your own identity. So if you behave perfectionistically, then it's changeable. If you view it as, I'm just a perfectionist, I can't change, then you're feeding into the belief that it won't change. So part of it, again, is focusing on behavior rather than identity. Or if you're stuck or even think, well, it's how my brain works, it's what I do, then it's helpful to look at it as part of what you're doing. It's one possible way you can do, but not everything you do all the time is perfectionistic. Even if you're perfectionistic in your coding or your artwork or something else, you probably don't sleep in a perfect way, or brush your teeth in a perfect way, or tie your shoes in a perfect way. It might be a good way, it might be an adequate way, but I guarantee you nobody is perfectionistic about everything because you can't. It's mutually impossible because while you're doing some things, you are by definition not paying full attention and doing others to the maximum. So again, the labeling is, think of perfection, and particularly in the OCD field, there's lots of studies looking at labeling this urge or tendency to be obsessive, to be perfect. If you can label it as part of you, that takes away some of its power. That reminds you, this isn't my whole brain, this is one part of my brain. My whole brain is bigger than that. So there's more of me that can resist it than has to go along with it. I mean, it's a small part. It could hijack all your brain, but it doesn't have to. So in terms of adjusting goals, I have 4 different points. And the first one is, well, the first one is if you're one of the 7 perfect people on this planet, you don't need to listen any further. And people usually say, okay, wait a minute. How do I become one of those 7 perfect people? Or they say, aha, I get it, there aren't 7 perfect people. If I start by telling you, nobody's perfect, nobody listens to that. It's so trite, it's so repeated, it goes over your head and you say, yeah, I know, no, nobody's perfect, but I have to get this detail right, I have to do this and this. But that's really important. Nobody is perfect, no task is done perfectly. Some of them are done extremely well, but none of them are perfect or flawless. That is not attainable. That should not be part of your goal. You can have a goal to do really well, you can have it to swim really fast or code really efficiently, but you're not going to be perfect. 2, I would suggest finding imperfect role models. And that's going to be really easy because guess what? Unless you found one of those 7 perfect people in the world to be your role model, everyone's imperfect. So any role model you pick is going to be imperfect. And it is fine to appreciate both the greatness or wonderful things they do and keep your eyes open and remember that they're not perfect. So this week, the Olympics, Simone Biles, acclaimed by many as the best gymnast ever, male or female, not just in this era, of all time so far. And is she having a great Olympics? And I'm not being mean or nasty to her because there are mental health issues here. I am just pointing out the best gymnast of all time. She ain't perfect. Good. Learn from that. Accept that. Even your role models, even your gods aren't perfect. You might think Trump is the best president in U.S. history. Even if you love him, you probably don't think boasting about grabbing women by the private parts is a perfect thing to be saying. You might think Obama is the best president ever. You know, he was still smoking. He was still doing other things that are less than perfect. He got sucked in by Mitch McConnell into negotiating forever and only getting a health care bill instead of health care, immigration, and everything else. You might think Jeff Bezos is the most brilliant businessman ever. Still wasn't perfect to sort of thank the little people for letting him blast off into his, as people say, penis rocket ship. You might love Steve Jobs. You might think he was a tremendous innovator, brilliant businessman, but first time he was running Apple, ran it into the ground. His next computer, brilliant technological innovations, didn't make it as a company. So everyone out there is imperfect, even the people who do really great, wonderful things. Remember that. You're not going to exceed them in your degree of perfectness, even if your accomplishments may exceed them. Number 3 for adjusting to goals, remember that life has time constraints. The biggest one is life itself has time constraints. You may be writing the perfect American novel and stowing it away in your laptop for the next 27 years. If you don't get it out into the world, no one's going to read it. It's not even a novel. It's just scribbling in your own mind. So not just as life has time constraints, but lots of projects for work, lots of collaborations with others, lots of things need to be done by a certain time, or they're not done at all, and almost always, this is leading into the next part, something good or adequate puts you far ahead of nothing that's close to perfect. So if you're not getting it done, if you don't have a product, you don't have a product. So that is the fourth point, that as many people have said, perfection can be the enemy of the good. So if you're so tied up in the details, if you're so focused on getting something absolutely right and you don't get anything turned out, the rest of the team can't work on it or build it. The product can't be shipped. Nobody's there to look at your light display or listen to your music if you waited till it was perfect before you put it out in the world. So almost everything. So one thing to remember is, again, this is sort of getting back to the role model, but in life in action, you might think the Mona Lisa is the best painting ever, or the show's, but Leonardo da Vinci didn't stop there. He might have liked it or not, I don't even know. But he didn't stop. He didn't think he had done one thing that answered all of his needs or for artistic expression. Beethoven didn't stop after one symphony or one. All these people who worked, got details right, got the big picture right, did wonderful things, kept producing. One piece of work is not going to be all that your life is defined by. It's not going to be all that your work life is going to be defined by. It's not going to be your artistic or creative output. And if you don't have anything produced, then you don't have anything there to make the world happier, or more beautiful, or more efficient, or whatever you're going for. So having more realistic goals is an important part of breaking through or dealing with perfectionism. And the last sort of overarching category I was going to talk about was accountability to others. So it's useful if you can't on your own sort of break through, is to have others either setting benchmarks and checking in before the final product's ready, and having others help and give you the input. Yes, this and this and this is good, and that's all we need is very good. We don't need that little piece to be tweaked to perfection before we can release it. Software can be updated, products can be revised. The Model T isn't what we're still driving now. People found ways to improve, make things better all the time. There's information you don't even have now that others will have that they can build on it. So again, use others to help you if you're having stuck, if you're not meeting your own sort of internal deadlines to keep on track. And when you're using others, it's often helpful to remember, your boss at work may be an ogre, maybe a jerk, but he's vested in your success. If you don't succeed, he's not likely to succeed. So try to reframe it as not me butting up against him, or as some people do even more globally, it's me against the world. I'm going to show all them that I can do the best piece of music or X, Y, or Z. They are still your audience. So if you're working against them, you're working against yourself. So try to remember, I have a common goal with these other people. These people have a vested interest in helping me to succeed. Use that to build on your success and not get in the way of perfection, not let your perfectionism get in the way. So I said that there's two big points where perfectionism, particularly people with ADHD, gets in the way, and one is on initiating tasks and one is on completing tasks. And Russell Ramsey, who's an expert on cognitive behavioral therapy for ADHD, has framed it that he thinks that sort of the underlying biggest cognitive error in terms of framing is this, that the situation needs to be perfect before I can get started. So lots of people with ADHD are familiar with, I'm going to be distracted. I better clean off my desktop and organize all my files here and put this away, because I know distractions, are something that can derail me, or I have to do that everything, or I don't feel right. I can tell that I'm not in my optimal thinking mode. I didn't take my medication early enough, or I'm tired from X, Y, or Z. So I probably doesn't make sense to start because I'm not going to do any good enough job anyway. So again, part of that is a reframing that getting started, doing something almost always is better than waiting and delaying and procrastinating. And we sort of feed into, some of our psychoeducational approaches to ADHD. We're telling people you're more distractible. You do need fewer distractions. You do need to structure this or this to do your optimally. There's truth in that, but if carried to the extreme, it sort of conveys the message that unless it's perfect, you can't do anything. And that part is wrong and unhelpful. So remember, okay, I may not be feeling the best I could possibly feel, but often once I get started, I will have momentum that carries me into it or converts me from the state I am now into a state of flow, into a state of doing it. But if I don't start, I never get into that state. So I'm going to share, and I've shared it before, but it's pertinent here, my sort of 4 or 5 point plan. I call it the SPAWN approach for dealing with procrastination. S for schedule, P for prepare, W for wants, M for no negatives. That's the SPAWN approach. So schedule. Set a specific time to get started. If you say, oh, I'll get back to that sometime this week. When is it sometime this week? Later, it's not there yet. On the other hand, if you say, okay, Tuesday, 3 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and work for 15 minutes on that, you are far more likely to get started and get going than if you say later, sometime this week, a vague, or if you don't schedule at all and just assume, I'll get to it sometime. Specific time doesn't guarantee it, but it makes it far more likely. 2 is prepare ahead. So if you're going to be ready to go at 3 o'clock, you need to be ready to do it then. So if you're scrambling because your computer monitor is dead and you need it, or the battery's died on your own iPhone, or you don't have the right clothes, or you don't have an address you're needing to contact someone, and then you spend your 15 minutes or hour, or whatever you've scheduled doing your prep work, you've sort of lost that opportunity. So some tasks, no prep work at all required. Other tasks, you might need to set a time and schedule the prep work so you are really ready to work and engage in the project at that time. So schedule first, prepare second, and a little bit when you're scheduling, sort of what you're scheduling is important. So getting back to adjusting your goals and making them realistic goals. The schedule shouldn't be, okay, just finish the project at 3 o'clock or from 3 to 4. You should make the goal for that hour something that's manageable, and that might entail the concept of chunking, of breaking a bigger project into smaller pieces. And again, it may involve the concept of momentum, that just getting started and into it. It may be just, I need to start writing ideas for this project and starting an outline, not even finishing, but again, if you just say, oh, I'm going to work on the project, then you're going to go there and just feel overwhelmed, too big, too vague, don't know where to start, don't know what to do. You may even have to arbitrarily choose a small piece of it to start on. But again, once you get started, having a task that's more manageable, more defined, and getting into it gives you the momentum may help. So the pivot point of this SPAWN approach is what happens when it's your time on the calendar to do it. Again, if you've ignored the calendar, if you've forgotten the calendar, that doesn't help. You can set reminders. But often what comes up when someone sees something on the calendar is, particularly with ADHD, is, well, I'm in the middle of this right now. This is a really good video, or I'm talking with my Aunt Sally and I haven't talked with her in weeks, and I'll get to that later. But I'd urge you to learn to respect your calendar. The wisest, nicest part of you that's trying to align your immediate time commitments with your lifetime goals is the person who put that on the calendar. So what comes up again sometimes is all the negatives of what else you're doing that's more interesting, and then why it's so much work, why it's so difficult, why you don't really know where to start, all those negatives. And then most people in their valiant attempt to overcome those negatives say, well, I really should do this, I need to do it, I have to do it. Need, shoulds aren't very compelling for most adults. What really gets them going and doing things is remembering why you want to do it. So on the calendar itself, or on a sticky note if it's a physical project, write why you want to do it, how you'll feel when you've written that beautiful piece of code, when you've turned in that homework assignment, when you've finished that art painting, whatever it is that you're doing, why you want to do it, why you like to do it, how it makes you feel alive, what sensory positive sensations you get, what positive praise or self-conception is going to grow inside of you when you see that being finished, is why. Those are part of the why you wants and what will be more motivating. And then the end part of that SPAWN approach, so schedule, prepare, wants, no negatives, is just not even engaging in all the negative voices of why you can't do it, or why it's too hard, or X, Y, or Z. Because once you've engaged in them, usually you are busy evaluating the process rather than being engaged in the process. And what you want, almost all anxiety is a shift in focus. So again, you're focusing on how you would evaluate it, how you imagine others would evaluate it, how you think it's not going. That's part of what perfectionism itself is, rather than doing. If you want to be doing, you can come back later and say, okay, I need to revise this, I need to alter this, I need to maybe even redo it over completely. But at least then you have something as a point of comparison to work from, to build from, to work on. Okay, so some of this also bleeds into my overall framing of quest versus test. And by that I mean, if you're viewing things feeling stuck, if you're evaluating yourself, if you're feeling like a failure or you can't go, almost always you view the situation as a test. And a test is a pass-fail. A test is usually someone else has decided what is success for you. A test doesn't tell you where you're going to go after it's gone. It's almost always much more useful, particularly when you're stuck like this, asking, what is my quest? What is it that I'm really trying to accomplish here? What are my goals? What do I want? What am I striving for here? And usually, again, part of the perfectionist mode, part of the ADD mindset can get us so focused on the tree in front of our face, we forget the forest we're walking in. We forget what our overall goal is. It may be really important to get the serif on the T right when you're calligraphing, but if your message is to get out birthday invitations, if your quest is to do it, if your quest or your task is that, and you're so obsessed on the detail of the lettering that you don't get it out, you've derailed your quest. So getting back to, okay, I want nice invitations, but I want the invitations out is more important than getting every jot and tittle correct. So I'm butting up against my self-imposed 20-minute limit. I'll say a little bit about completion of tasks. So this is more useful for initiation. Sometimes it's helpful to go through the whole SPAWN just to schedule time to get into a space to work on completion. And working on completion, probably the two previous things we talked about that are most important is, again, remembering how perfection can be the enemy of the good, and that time constraints are a real and aspect of life. So you might not like them, you might not agree with them, they may feel like they're impinging on your freedom or individuality, but almost always we're talking about ventures that someone else is going to share, use, profit from, work with. You have to find a way to accommodate that, or you've done nothing. So open to questions. Again, this will be posted both on Facebook and on YouTube. And next week I'll be talking about exercise and ADHD as we tie into the end of the Olympics and catch in there. Have a good, healthy, happy week, and I'll be back next Friday at 11. I'm not seeing any questions, so bye for now.